สร้างเศรษฐกิจคนเศรษฐศาสตร์โดยคณะเศรษฐศาสตร์จุฬาลงกรณ์มหาวิทยาลัย
I want to thank you for joining me today for this talk. My name is Ajahn Matthew Benton. I'm a lecturer of economics in the EBA program at Chulalongkorn University. And today I'm going to be talking about weight loss and the economics of fitness, food, and health. It would appear to me that as a result of COVID, and the policies related to it and people's behavioral response to both COVID and the policies, that there is a significant concern related to weight loss and mental health. There's been a growing related interest in promoting exercise for weight loss. Based on what I've learned from various medical experts and my own personal experience with both well-disciplined and structured training, particularly running, as well as my own weight loss experience, that these two things are only tangentially related, meaning that the exercise is not the direct cause of the weight loss. It has a minimal, albeit positive, effect. Many people still believe that the emphasis is on calories in versus calories out. So the question is, shall we just exercise more and cut calories in order to be healthier, happier, and to lose weight? Well, what I've learned and what I would like to share with others is that we need to understand hormones and the connection with the brain. So we need to look at what hormonal response does food trigger and what hormonal response exercise triggers. Then we also want to ask how hormones are related to both physical and mental health. Now, what do diabetes, insulin resistance, and obesity have in common? They reflect a hormone imbalance. In other words, the system has been pushed out of balance over a period of time until it loses the ability to regulate itself. This is in many ways the result of our modern food system that we have adapted to. Stress has also been linked to every disease condition known to man, and because stress is a result of lifestyle, it's the way of life that we have adapted, and to reduce stress, we have to change our lifestyle. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It is part of the weight loss picture, but in order to reduce cortisol, we have to also change the whole picture. Some people look at cortisol because of insulin resistance, weight gain, and type 2 diabetes. But we have to also understand the autonomic nervous system, and this is what manages everything about your body that you don't have to regularly think about. It has two branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Stress is a response from the sympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the system that responds to things that threaten you. It increases resources so that you can defend yourself. Heart rate increases. Blood pressure goes up. Blood sugar for quick fuel increases. Cortisol goes up to raise the blood sugar, increase muscle tension, and increases in LDL cholesterol because that is part of wound clotting. Parasympathetic side is what handles your digestion and stimulates immune responses. It is also responsible for reproduction function and for healing. Now, we can't activate both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic at the same time. You end up trading off sympathetic for parasympathetic functioning. Now, the sympathetic side is not a bad thing per se. We just don't want to be in an emergency all the time. It's designed for short bursts of activity. In our modern lifestyle, however, it doesn't matter if it's a short-term threat or long-term threats, such as financial pressure, bad news, overwhelm at work, feelings of being overwhelmed and insufficient. All of that affects the sympathetic, and we develop chronic stress. So we will look into how exercise and physical activity plays a role in stress reduction and how it indirectly improves weight loss, mental and physical health in general. So why is this an economics question? It does have a lot of connections with economics. First of all, it deals with time and budget management, as well as welfare improvements at the individual level. Second, there are overall implications for improvement in well-being and sustainable use of resources at the societal level. There are public economic concerns around taxes, subsidies, and regulations targeted at unhealthy products. And finally, it requires an understanding of the economic system and the institutional barriers to achieving social goals of health, both physical and mental, and happiness in a sustainable way, and overcoming asymmetric information. Most people think food's purpose is to provide calories and energy for the body. Some would also think food adds variety and enjoyment to life for those who appreciate the culinary arts. While both of these are true, what we want to focus on here is that food, through hormonal responses, sends messages to the brain. Now, these various messages are related to perceived abundance or lack of energy, and this may lead the body to tap into different energy sources as the brain perceives different hunger and satiety signals. When we eat, our body has a normal negative feedback loop. So we start with ghrelin, which is a hormone that signals hunger to the brain. Once the body has consumed enough calories for satiation, the hormone leptin then is triggered along with the release of insulin, which is a fat storage hormone. The leptin is one of the key negative feedback mechanisms which makes sure that we don't overeat, and we also won't end up storing too much fat by continuing to eat. Now, the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that is the master regulator, where signals and triggers originate. These things include heart rate, temperature, sleep cycles, breathing, energy balance, hunger, and thirst. Sugar, particularly fructose, is a carbohydrate that does not suppress ghrelin, but it does suppress the hormone leptin. This means that hunger increases, and you never get the signal that you are full. This leads to overeating. Now, this is why the processed food industry has added a lot of sugar to their products as a way of getting people hooked and to overconsume. Now, frequency of meals is another important consideration for switching the brain to tap into different energy sources. The body has enormous amounts of usable energy in the fat stored on the body, which is an optimal fuel source, obviously, for people looking to burn fat and lose weight. However, depending on the basal metabolic rate and whether the body perceives abundance or lack, the brain may be tapping into whichever source it perceives is abundant. Now, if the body is dependent on receiving regular supplies of glucose, it will tap into that. But that requires a constant repletion of glucose, which is what happens with frequent meals. Because glucose needs insulin to help it get into the cell, with continued release of insulin, the cells become resistant to it and eventually will no longer accept. Now, insulin resistance is recognized as a leading precondition or leading to prediabetes. Now, fat adaptation, on the other hand, is when the brain recognizes that it cannot expect the constant repletion of glucose, so it switches to the next available abundant source, which is the stored fat. Now, the use of fat instead of glucose for energy is known as ketosis. This can be achieved through restricting the eating window of the day to only about 6 to 8 hours. This is known contemporarily as intermittent fasting. Now, fat, protein, and carbs all lead to different amounts of insulin release, and fat releases the least amount of insulin while carbs trigger the most, protein somewhere in between. Now, processed sugar, or sucrose, which is half glucose, half fructose, particularly the fructose half, is a specific carbohydrate that leads to dramatic increases in insulin. There is a vicious cycle of consumption and disease from fructose consumption, according to Robert Lustig. Now, metabolic syndrome, which is the combination of obesity, type 2 diabetes, lipid problems, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, these are all caused by chronic fructose exposure alone, again, according to Robert Lustig. This is why many have advocated a low-carb, low-sugar diet to reverse insulin resistance, which is the primary cause associated with type 2 diabetes. Now, everyone, I think, would agree that exercise and physical activity are key complements to overall health. This should not be news to most people. However, I have come to realize that we often misunderstand the primary role that movement plays in our overall health. It's a common belief that we need to lose weight to get healthy. Therefore, we often focus on devoting more and more time to exercise to burn calories. The common misperception is that it's the excess body fat that is what leads to poor health, but rather, it is the poor health that leads to the weight gain. Now, only about 5% of the benefits of exercise on weight loss are the direct result of burning calories. Most of the benefits of exercise are indirect or metabolic. The important hormones to consider here are cortisol, which is the stress hormone and also one that increases blood sugar, human growth hormone, which is related to fat burning and metabolism, and insulin, the fat storage hormone. Now, we need to bring down levels of insulin and cortisol, which we can do by reducing sugar and carbs and by reducing stress. Now, the primary benefits of exercise are related to improving the brain and quality of life. Now, in order to keep your brain healthy, it requires three things. First, fuel, either in the form of glucose or ketones, as we mentioned already. Second is oxygen. And third is activation. Since the purpose of the brain is to process information, when you send signals to it, it makes the brain stronger. Now, where do these signals come from? Well, it can either be mental exercise or physical exercise. Now, while mental exercises are good, it solidifies the neural networks that are already there, but it doesn't do much to build new tissue and drive the formation of new circuits. Physical activity or exercise is what really drives the brain. 90% of the signals that reach the brain and keep it alive are from movement. The purpose of the brain is, in fact, to process and facilitate movement. So if you want a strong brain, you have to activate it. And when your brain grows stronger, particularly the frontal lobe, which is the management center, it helps balance your stress responses. Now, how does exercise affect the brain and indirectly fat burning and weight loss? Well, when you are moving, you activate the whole brain, but mostly it's the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is inhibitory. It turns things off. So it receives information and decides what the priority should be and turns off lower priority bodily functions. One of the things it turns off is stress, which reduces cortisol. It also turns off anxiety and depression, which are often associated with eating more. And it also controls impulses, which improves motivation and willpower and controls temptations. Now, keeping in mind, exercise is a form of stress. So how can we maximize the hormonal benefits of exercise through lower insulin resistance and increased production of human growth hormone with the least amount of stress and subsequent cortisol production? Well, again, human growth hormone is a rejuvenating, muscle-sparing, muscle-building hormone and one which increases metabolism. The focus is less on how many calories are burned during a workout and more on how you can increase metabolism and fat burning outside of workouts. Now, there's a huge difference in hormone responses between moderate and vigorous exercise. Low to moderate is okay and will help, but vigorous exercise may actually be worse. One thing to keep in mind is that fitness and health are not the same thing. So even though there is some association between the two, anaerobic exercise can improve fitness while not improving health. So for those who are already relatively overweight, they should probably avoid doing anaerobic exercise. But aerobic exercise is great for brain activation, while high-intensity interval training is great for human growth hormone and increased metabolism for fat burning outside of workouts. Now, core strengthening is great because it stabilizes the spine, and therefore you can send a whole lot more signals to the brain on a regular basis just through regular movement. In economics, we are concerned about maximizing social welfare. A lot of people would associate improved happiness as a social goal. However, happiness and pleasure often get confused. Pleasure seeking is related to dopamine, which is a type of neurotransmitter and hormone that serves as a reward and motivation stimulant. Pleasure is usually short-lived, and it can be achieved with substances, and in extreme cases can lead to addiction. Happiness, on the other hand, is related to serotonin, which is also a neurotransmitter and a hormone responsible for contentment. When serotonin level is out of balance, it can lead to irritability and depression. Happiness is longer-lived, It cannot be achieved with substances and does not lead to addiction. While dopamine excites, serotonin is inhibitory. Dopamine downregulates serotonin, so the more pleasure you seek, actually the more unhappy you get. Improvement in nutrition and lowering stress will have enormous health benefits. Treating health from a more holistic perspective is very economic in the way that it focuses not on treating specific ailments, but rather on getting the overall system in balance, which leads to the self-correction of many chronic diseases that are often treated with pharmaceuticals. The improvements in brain functioning from movement and better nutrition will translate into better cognitive performances in school and work. We could also see a more harmonious society if there are greater levels of contentment and lower crime. The good news is that we have the resources to accomplish this and even lower our resource use if we apply this knowledge to our individual decision making. From a sustainability perspective, we as a society could live happier, healthier lives with fewer resources than we collectively use currently. The problem is we are caught in a system with a growth imperative which requires a lot of wasteful production and consumption for the sake of keeping the system afloat. The American economy, for example, has conflated pleasure and happiness in order to suggest that you can buy happiness. Now, when it comes to institutional barriers, a holistic healthcare or functional medicine approach is more economic than the modern medical approach to healthcare because it uses fewer resources in that it focuses on prevention over treatment. Socialized healthcare systems typically have an incentive to prevent illness in order to keep costs down. However, privatized for-profit healthcare systems have an incentive to treat illness. Much of our healthcare costs, at least in the United States, are going towards the treatment of chronic metabolic diseases. In this system, there is no medicalized prevention for chronic metabolic disease, only long-term treatment. The pharmaceutical companies are very happy to sell those prescription drugs for treatment because people are usually on them for 20 to 30 years. Now, you can't fix healthcare until you fix health. You can't fix health until you fix diet. And you can't fix diet until you know what's wrong. Now, this holistic healthcare or functional medicine approach is less profit-oriented because, as we've already seen, a number of experts have made this information widely available for free, and it gives individuals the power to alter their choices toward a healthier lifestyle. However, individuals possessing the knowledge is only part of the solution. That's the first barrier, which is relatively easy to overcome with information sharing capabilities. However, there are still structural challenges related to our economic system which limit options and opportunities, even for those who possess the understanding of what to do. This is particularly true for those with lower incomes and limited proximity to fresh, whole food sales. Ironically, our food system and the food industry does not serve the public by providing us with healthy food. They are in the business of profit-making with no concern for the public's health. I would even go as far as to say that they have an interest in making us unhealthy and addicted to their products in order to sell even more. This means processed foods with little nutritional value, low fiber, and many added chemicals. The priorities are on shelf life by adding preservatives and removing fiber, and adding sugar for palatability in addition to increased hunger and decreased satiety signals through the ghrelin and leptin signals that we've already talked about. Now, why do we have an epidemic of obese 6-month-olds? Has the incentive to formula feed rather than breastfeed led to an increase in overweight children? Well, if we look at the ingredients in formula, typically, it's about 43% corn syrup solids and about 10.3% sucrose. Now, in soda or CocaCola, for example, it's about 10.5%. So it's very comparable in terms of the percentage of sugar. Now, in the literature, it's been shown that the earlier you expose children to sugar, the more they will crave it later. So there's clearly an incentive here. There's even new literature that says the more sugar the pregnant mother eats or drinks, the more gets across the placenta and causes developmental programming, which changes the kid's adiposity before they are even born. Now, processed food is high sugar, low fiber. Real food, in contrast, is low sugar, high fiber. All the diets that work are real food, whether it is high fat or high carb. It doesn't really matter. real food led to weight loss. The processed food companies, the sweetened beverage companies, and the fast food and junk food companies spend enormous amounts of money annually in marketing expenses to push products onto consumers, which are known to be unhealthy. This goes beyond satisfying an existing demand. This is creating demand and getting people hooked on these products by optimizing the mix of sugar, salt, and fat. For example, what is in CocaCola? Caffeine and salt. Caffeine is a diuretic, which makes you urinate free water. Salt, which in Coca-Cola, 55 milligrams per can, which is equivalent to eating a pizza, the combination of the diuretic and the salt makes you thirstier. They add the sugar to hide the salt. Now, in new Coca-Cola, in 1985, they added more salt and more caffeine, so they knew what they were doing. High fructose corn syrup was added in the 1970s in the United States, and it's very cheap, and it's found its way into much of the processed foods in the United States. For example, only 1 out of 32 loaves of bread in a typical American supermarket does not contain high fructose corn syrup. Now, the sugar industry trade groups go back, they have a long history. Now, we have the U.S. sweetener industry, which is composed of beet and sugarcane growers, as well as the corn growers, which that is the ingredient in high fructose corn syrup. But in 1943, the beet and cane sugar growers started working together, known as the Sugar Research Association. And in 1949, it became the Sugar Association, whose mission was to promote sugar consumption. Their strategies were to influence scientific research, public relations, education, and also to influence public policy. Globally, we have a lot of similar types of sugar industries in various countries, but there's a global World Sugar Research Association based in London, and this actually includes even multinational corporations like Coca-Cola, as well as the International Life Sciences Institute. To wrap things up, if people want to live a healthy, balanced lifestyle, both physically and mentally, the question is, how much of the budget should one allocate toward making sure that they buy healthy food and dedicate enough time to physical activities? Should we be willing to spend a little bit more for food than we normally do, or should we just settle for whatever food is the cheapest? Are low-income people unable to access quality food? Perhaps the trade-off for them is very high with such a limited budget. But is it an investment worth making? Or should we rely on government intervention to ensure access to these products for everyone? This is a very important question because we've developed a food system that's going to be challenging to alter with corporate control over much of the food production. We need to get back to organic, community-oriented food growing and exchange, which can also help foster a sense of inclusivity. Can low-income people afford to allocate time for exercise? How much time is necessary to provide the essential movement for activating the brain and reducing stress? Even 30 minutes of walking or other aerobic activity per day provides enormous benefit, so it doesn't have to be an extreme commitment to training. High-intensity interval training does not require much time to commit either to contribute to human growth hormone and increase basal metabolic rates. We should allocate time away from activities that lead to stress, which could be related to pleasure-seeking and the dopamine fix, such as screen time on social media and interpersonal comparisons of material possessions and wealth glorification. Substituting time previously spent chasing financial goals, often through stressful competition, would free up time spent with friends and family and leisure time, and allocating time towards things related to contentment and satiation means less wasteful consumption, which would be a healthier, happier, and more sustainable lifestyle. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining me, and I want to wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks.